Welcome. This is Meet the Candidates on BCTV, and I would like to introduce my first interview, Michael Mrowicki. He is one of our current representatives to the House for Windham County. He has been serving 6 terms for Windham 4, and for those who don't know, that is Dummerston, Putney, Westminster. And you are running for re-election in this upcoming election, and you are one of few contested races.
That's right.
That's right. You have 2 other opponents.
Yep.
And unfortunately, you're also saying goodbye to one of your long-standing comrades,
Yeah.
David Dean.
Yeah.
What does this year feel like going into this election? I mean, you've done so many.
Yeah. Well, we're in different times here for Vermont. These are very challenging times for democracy, from Washington right down to the local level. And what we're seeing in Vermont now from this governor, we've never seen before. These are Trump policies. These are attempts to affect policy and legislation by manipulation rather than through the legislative process, because this governor doesn't have the votes to do it. So that's why the budget vetoes. There have been 3 budget vetoes in the history of this state, and 2 of them from this governor in 2 years. So these are times where it's important to be able to push back, but just as importantly, I think it's important to bring a voice of reason, to do it in a way that we can look back and say, we're proud of the work we did and how we did it. You mentioned David Dean, and it's a loss to all of us. His work on the environment and so many other areas is going to be missed. He's been front and center. He's as strong as any legislator out there when it comes to the forces that are trying to push us, like the governor vetoing the environmental bills he did. And David is as knowledgeable as anybody, so it's going to be a great loss. He's been a friend too over the years, and it'll be a loss, but I look to the future because we've got more work to do. Whatever we do, we're trying to work under the banner of justice, whether it's economic justice, environmental justice, racial, social justice. It's important, going back for as long as Vermont has been Vermont, that these are the values that we bring forward, and that's informed the legislation we've put forward. It's where the conflicts arose with the governor we have now, but it's important that we keep pushing, and that's my intention. We have more work to do on top of the work we've done this year.
You mentioned David Dean, and he is retiring after this session at some point will end, hopefully with a budget before July 1st. Has he given you any words of advice?
Well, David's always given me good words of advice, starting with my first day in the legislature. I'll share you that later. But David has been a great model to remind me that we are the voice of the people back home. In a representative democracy, representatives are the conduit, especially being further away from Montpelier. So it's important for us to be the voice of our people, and especially to be the voice for those without a voice. And I'm talking about elderly, young children, the disabled. They really don't have a voice. They don't have the lobbyists that the business community does. So it's important for us to be the voice for them.
Now, currently in the legislature, you serve on the Human Services Committee. But what skills have you brought from your outside life, your non-legislative session life, that kind of serve you in the State House?
Well, again, it starts with listening, but it's also about cultivating relationships and being able to use the experience to know people, let them get to know me, so they'll trust me. I think an example is the bill I've been working on for the last 2 years. We know from probably 20 years of research now that childhood trauma is at the root of so many of our social problems right now. Generational poverty, generational incarceration, generational addiction, special education, chronic health care needs. So many of this can be attributed to childhood trauma. So 2 years ago, we started the process of saying the legislature can do more and can do better in this area. Last summer, I was appointed to a special legislative working committee. I was elected the chair of that committee, and we were able to inform more legislators to understand this problem better. And then we did pass a piece of legislation which addresses the systems in place. It's to help people see the prevalence and the effects of childhood trauma. And I'm happy to say it's one of the bills the governor did sign. But it passed in the House with tripartisan support, 138 to 0. That's the way you build legislation. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of relationships to help people get to know you and know them so they'll trust you, and I think that's a result of the work we did here. And going forward, you know, legislation is not written in stone, it's written in paper. It's one of the things I often talk about when I'm debating people over our gun laws. Second Amendment isn't written in stone, it's written in paper because it's malleable, it's a living document like any law. So we'll look at the childhood trauma bill again as we move forward to make sure things are happening as they should.
Right.
That's what we do with most laws too.
And just to circle back to the childhood trauma law, because you and I had talked about that in previous interviews, and one thing, if I remember correctly, the state is hoping to do is to create an environment where trauma is quickly recognized and then mediated as soon as possible so that it doesn't have that compounding effect.
You bet.
Over years. And was there in this bill a person, like a new staff position that was created?
There is. There's going to be a director of trauma services and resilience development, because that is the other part of the equation. We can mitigate childhood adversity if there are other supports, both within the family and in the community. And it's important that we build those attachments, we build those protective factors, and that's the other piece of this that we want to help move forward on.
You know, education is a big issue for a lot of towns. And for Dummerston, Putney, and Westminster, what other issues do you feel are facing those three towns that you would like to focus on?
I think that education is a huge one right now because of Act 46. We have been going through a protracted process here, and it's not finished yet. I think we have 3 schools that are doing really well. Our students work hard, our teachers work hard, and it shows. We've got great outcomes. And the challenge is going to be how do we move forward in a way that recognizes how well these schools are doing. Unfortunately, Act 46 has moved the discussion from how do we serve all students well to governance. The challenge we have in Vermont in education is most of our kids are doing well, but we have that cohort of students that are struggling. It's what we call the performance gap, and most of those are in a lower socioeconomic demographic. What I'm hoping is we can move past talking about governance and get back to focusing on those students in the performance gap. The other challenge, though, and we're seeing it with this governor again, though, my concern with Act 46, worst case scenario, it opens the door to close schools.
Right.
This governor's talking about it already.
A number of people have expressed that concern,
And that's not the way we move forward in education. Closing schools is not the answer. Limiting teachers is not the answer. It's important as we move forward that we understand education is the best investment we make for all of us. And I like to tell people the kids of today will be reading our blood pressure tomorrow. So we want them to be able to do it well.
Right.
And we certainly want them to feel like we gave them all they needed so they can give us all we need.
Well, that's an interesting point. I was speaking to one of your colleagues the other day, Senator Tim Ash, who's the pro tem of the Senate, and he was saying one of his concerns about the budget standoff that's happening in Montpelier right now is that in the bigger picture and the longer term, that what the governor is trying to do is to undercut public education.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? And if so, how does the legislature combat that?
Sure. I think that's, again, we're seeing the influence of the Koch brothers here. This is what's happening nationwide. where these policies are put forward. If you look at the last 3 appointments the governor has made to the State Board of Education, these are all independent school supporters, not public education supporters. And what we need to do is make sure, first of all, we shine light on this. I think it's great that Tim Ash was talking about that, and we need to do this as well. If we don't, we run the risk of people being not aware of it. The Washington Post now has on their banner, "Democracy dies in darkness." This is another example. Democracy depends upon education. What you're seeing with the governor going after schools, school budgets, teachers, is all part, I think, of a plan to undercut education. His plan right now to effect a deficit in the education budget for next year and then come back and say, look, this isn't working. Well, of course it's not working. If you set it up not to work, it's not going to work. I mean, that's where the budget conflict is right now. What we're saying is that taking one-time money just kicks the can down the road. And if we have a surplus right now, what I'd like to do, let's turn around and give it right back to Vermonters in rebates.
Okay.
And
What kind of rebates?
Just direct rebate for anybody that files an income tax in Vermont. The money that's coming in is not just property tax money. It's from all, so the governor just wants to give it back in property tax relief.
Right.
What I say is give it to all Vermonters.
Let them decide what to do with it.
Let them decide what to do with it. If there's extra money, give it back to Vermonters.
What about health care? In past years, we tried very hard to bring that single payer
You bet.
To the fore. We've tried to have universal preventative medicine, things like that. Do you think any type of universal health coverage is dead in Vermont, or do you think there's a way forward on that?
I think it's sleeping right now. It's dormant. Here's the 2 biggest barriers to that. We need to find a mutually acceptable funding source, but we also need those waivers from Washington for Medicare and Medicaid, and that's not going to happen with this president. We might have gotten it from the Obama administration, but this president here is doing all he can to undo all the good things that President Obama did for health care. In Vermont, we have a very low rate of uninsured people, but we have that next tier where there are a lot of people who have insurance and they really can't utilize it because of the copays and the deductibles. Right. We want to keep moving. Thoughts of expanding Dr. Dinosaur to 26, Medicare for all. I know all of these have their downsides to it, but I think it's incrementally moving forward where we have a universal state national health service. Those 2 barriers, though, we haven't yet found a way to get past them. And with this president, like I said, we need those Medicare and Medicaid waivers. There's a large percentage of people who are on Medicaid in Vermont, and with an aging population, more and more on Medicare. Without that, we can't do it on our own. We need that federal part. So I'd like to keep moving. And what I would add, though, this is talking about insurance. And what I'd like to get to as well is to talk about health care reform. We did start some health care reform several years ago, the Blueprint for Health, which is actually doing some really good things. And I don't know if you've talked about Richard Davis about this.
Not in a while, but yes.
But he's part of the team here. We have these teams that we're putting up and setting in Vermont to help with population health, to help with those things that we can change and move away from needing so much chronic care. That's real health care reform. And that's, again, similar to education. I want to let's stop talking about insurance and start talking about health care, population health. How do we make ourselves more educated and real partners in our own health care to reduce the costs and provide for a healthier population?
Now, you've talked a couple times about how the governor is operating, and it's kind of led to this standoff that we find ourselves in at the end of the session. What is your approach to accomplishing your goals? How do you move that ball forward?
Sure. Building coalitions. Last year, working with the people locally, we knew we wanted to try and amend Act 46, give people more time, let us look at alternatives. I got together with several other legislators. We developed a core of 30 legislators who banded together and had some legislation drafted that would amend Act 46. We took it to the Speaker, and we worked through channels, said, you know, there's a lot of us who support this because we think it's the right way to go. We're bringing the words, the voices of our constituents here. The good thing was the Speaker's reaction was the Speaker needs this too. This is what her constituents are saying. Okay. So then we were able to get on the agenda. We were able to pass this bill. I mean, there was a lot of pushback. You know, Act 46 around the state's pretty popular, but what we said is there's parts of the state where this isn't quite working the way it was supposed to. So we were able to get that passed. Similarly with the childhood trauma bill, the challenge here is many people are not aware of the situation and how prevalent this is. So we start with educating people, bringing people into the fold. Senator David Soucy was one of the members of this working group. He didn't have a lot of experience. And as we went through the process, by the time we got to the end of our legislative study work, he said, you know, I wasn't aware of this, but I'm on board now. And I'm going to go right to the governor and say, this is something we need to keep pushing. So I think we put good information out there, bring people together, and that's the way we can affect change. What
are your kind of deal breakers? When you're negotiating something, what are your deal breakers?
Sure. Well, I don't go into a situation with that because with that in mind, because I'd like to think that we try and find common ground wherever we go. You know, we're challenged right now because we have been moving towards the governor, and he's irresolute. He hasn't moved a bit. And so that's a challenge.
Despite his press releases, yeah.
You need two people to partner. So at some point, if you realize the other person's not going to move, that can be a deal breaker. Negotiations you need two people to negotiate. Whether it's a relationship, whether it's a business relationship, you need to have both parties working towards each other. But I'd like to think that, you know, you can get to yes. At some point in time, you'll find the common ground. You know, one of the great things about getting to meet and know people in the legislature, I'll give you an example, is Representative Mike Hebert in Vernon. Now, Mike and I have really gotten to know each other in the last couple of years, working on Act 46 together. We've both opposed it. We both realize, and Mike is as dedicated to education as anybody out there. He's been on school boards, working for kids for decades. So I certainly can trust what he's doing for kids. We've gotten to know each other in a way where we pretty much don't agree on anything else except Act 46, but we know we can work on that. And the challenge that I had to learn early on in the legislature is we might disagree on something today, but tomorrow we're going to need to work on something else together. So you can't burn bridges. And trying to be open-minded and open-hearted is getting to that place.
And how about for you personally? You know, you will be on the ballot, or at least the primary ballot, with two other people, Cindy Jerome and Nader Hashim, two newcomers. And how do you differentiate yourself from them? Like, what makes you unique as a leader?
Well, I certainly have some experience to work with, and that's why I would look forward to working with either one of those. They're both good, smart people, and certainly ready to learn and jump in. One of the keys to being an effective legislator is having the respect of your fellow legislators. I think that's how I've been able to come forward and bring some legislation that wasn't initially popular or well known and get it passed. I think it's another reason why I was the only male appointed to the Sexual Harassment Prevention Committee in the House. That I feel like I've earned the respect of my colleagues. They know me, and it helps when you were trying to push something forward. That takes time. It takes time to build those relationships, and I don't doubt wherever you start from, you can get to that place. But that's where I am now, and I've always got something I can learn. but I have built up that political capital that I can take to the bank.
So just the completely self-serving question, why should people vote for you?
Sure. I've been producing. I feel like I have the connections in the community as well that creates that conduit to Montpelier. It's one of the things I work hard at. I work hard at staying connected with people, with families, and being responsive to what's happening for them. Whether it's somebody whose grandmother didn't get the heating assistance. You know, we had an incident last year where this elderly couple, the husband died. And when it came time for the heating assistance to come up, the check didn't come in. And they realized he had always been the one to do the paperwork and sign up for it.
Okay.
Called up the commissioner the next day, they were back on the rolls. I think that's some of the most important work we do as legislators, is to be able to serve our constituents when the chips are down, when they don't know where else to turn. You know, we can talk about bills and laws, but that piece of service is as important to me as anything, and I think that's what builds the connections in our community.
You know, you mentioned this couple and their heating assistance, and it brings us to the buzzword of the session, which is affordability.
Sure.
And I have to agree with the governor. When I look at my pay stub and my expenses, they're not always in alignment.
Sure.
How do you propose we make Vermont more affordable for
Sure.
Vermonters?
Well, I differ from the governor, and I think the governor's primarily focused on property taxes. And what I'd like to do is make everyday living more affordable. That's why I've been one of the proponents of the Essex Plan. Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility recognized 20 of us at the beginning of this session as climate champions. We've been pushing the Essex Plan, and we're going to keep pushing it, which combines climate action and economic development. What it'll do, it'll help lessen our carbon use, and then it's going to lower people's electric bills. Progressively, based on those who need it most, we'll see smaller electric bills. And I feel that's where people really need help with as much as property taxes. People need help with better jobs, livable wage jobs, affordable housing. I'm on the Affordable Housing Committee in Putney. We've been pushing for years. Our first effort didn't go far. We wanted to work in conjunction with the Windham Windsor Housing Trust. We were going to do a development over at the Basketville site. That didn't work. We came back a few years later with the trust, and we're going to have something online at the Newman Hall site, 20 units of affordable housing.
Yes.
We need more. I think the more we can get affordable housing units online, we can bring down economic barriers. I think that's one of the barriers for people coming here. Housing is a challenge. It's one of the biggest costs. You know, more of us pay more for housing around here than we do in other parts of the country. So that's another area where I want to keep moving the bar forward on affordable housing. Medicines. We just passed a bill this year where we're going to start the process of looking to import drugs from Canada.
Right.
When I talk to people, the cost of medicine is one of the biggest barriers to keeping people healthy. So that's another way that I want to make Vermont more livable. It's not just about property taxes. So if we can do both with electric, thermal heating the same way, we need to start being able to make our houses tighter, more efficient, and more effectively low cost. Those are the areas where I think we can make Vermont more affordable if we address something more than just property taxes.
Right. What are your regrets as a legislator, excuse me?
Sure. Well, I'm always learning, so I hope that something comes up and I make a mistake. I know early on I learned that when you give your word to somebody, you'd better follow through on it. I've seen other people become totally ineffective because they didn't. Like, for instance, if you say you're going to vote for something or not, you'd better follow through. So I learned that early on. The challenges of being in the legislature, I think, are it's hard to be away from home. I really enjoy the work. I enjoy serving. I mean, I've been in public service in various ways way before I went into the legislature, and there's a great sense of satisfaction in serving the public. The challenge here is during those winter months, being away from home 4 days a week. That's one of the downsides or a regret.
But what is it that keeps you coming back to this job? What do you love?
Sure. I appreciate being able to serve our fellow Vermonters. We always have challenges coming up, but when we come together and understand our values about community, about helping each other, about justice, what's right, what's wrong, it's a great place to live, and I want to help keep it that way. So that's as much of an inspiration as I need. There's another part of it too. I owe. When my second daughter was born, she was born very premature, spent lots of time in the hospital, so did we. Community really came together. We were that family that people thought about and said, oh boy, they could use some gas money to get up to the hospital. They could use a meal. I really found out about what community was about because they took us in, and I'm paying back that kind of generosity of spirit that people gave to us, so other people can experience that too. That's one of the great things about Vermont, that people come together no matter what, and it's a great place to live, and I want to help keep it that way.
Any closing comments before we end?
You know, like I was saying, Vermont's a great place to live. I want to keep it a great place to live, to work, to raise a family, to retire with security. I want to make sure that we can fly the flag of justice here, whether it's economic justice, environmental justice, or racial and social justice. I want to feel good about where we live, who we live with. It's up to us to be reaching out, to work together with people. And as we move forward in Vermont, I look forward to being able to serve you again.
Representative Mike Mrowicki, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Candidate.
You bet. Thank you. And thanks to BCTV.
Once again,
they come through and bring the work of the county out to people who might not be able to otherwise.
Yes, thank you.
All right.